Good morning, everyone. I want to thank all of you for being on here today in our session on intersectional strategies to addressing climate-related security risks. My name is Jose Alvarado. I'm a program officer for the Peace Building and Sustaining Peace program in the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation based in Uppsala, Sweden. At the foundation, we started having discussions on intersectionality. And as part of those discussions, we've had two previous roundtables trying to provide an overview of the topic itself, followed by a roundtable that was looking more specifically at the relationship between intersectionality and data. So as part of that process, today we will be talking about the relationship between intersectionality and climate-related security risks, which will hopefully feed into the Foundation's development dialogue volume that will be published in the fall of this year. So I'm hoping that all of you here and interested in this topic will follow us in our newsletter where we will be providing more information about this throughout the year. So with that, I would like to thank all of you once again, and Christelle, the floor is yours.
Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon for those of you who are joining us from other parts of the world. I'm Christelle Casaba, and I'm the research manager at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. It's really my pleasure to be here today and to try and moderate this discussion with our very exciting speakers and with all of you, really, because we'd like this conversation to be interactive as much as possible. So please do feel free to use the chat. You can type at any time any questions you have or any comments, and we'll be monitoring this throughout the conversation so that we can really engage with each and every one of you. Maybe we can start and make sure that the chat box works for everyone. Please tell us where you are joining us from. I'm joining from France, and I know our speakers are joining from different parts of the world. We'll get to that in a second, but do feel free to just type in the country where you're joining us this morning or afternoon. And as Jose explained already, this event is the third of a series on intersectionality. And we've already, through the first two events, explained what is intersectionality and why it's so important to collect better data to apply intersectional approaches. So what we'd like to do today is really just dig into, now that we're all convinced, hopefully on this call at least, of the importance of applying intersectional approaches. We want to know how to do it in practice, and we're going to learn from one another on the challenges we face, because it's not that easy actually, but also hopefully learning from some good experiences and practices we can then take back to our own pieces of work. So since I'm already speaking, I'll start with just a few words about how we apply intersectional approaches at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center. For those of you who don't know us, we're a relatively small organization, about 35 very passionate people, all based in Geneva. And we conduct research on internal displacement linked with conflicts, violence, and disasters. That also includes displacement in the context of climate change. We're part of the Norwegian Refugee Council, which is a much, much larger organization, probably some of you know. And we were created about 23 years ago to initially just count the number of people displaced by conflicts. That was our initial mandate, but we have expanded throughout the years. And I think it was in 2008, we started looking at displacement in the context of disasters as well. And for the past maybe 4 years, we've paid greater attention to internal displacement in the context of climate change, which is really not that easy to monitor. I'll say just a couple of brief words about this, and then I'll tell you why intersectional approaches are so important to this part of our work. Many people think that internal displacement in the context of climate change is the same as displacement caused by disasters. That's not entirely true. There are links, of course, but there are also important differences that I'd just like to stress here. One of the differences is that not all disasters are linked with climate change. There have always been disasters. There have always been storms and floods. The thing with climate change is that these disasters become more frequent, more intense, and affect more people potentially. But we also have, of course, disasters like earthquakes or volcanic eruptions that have nothing to do with climate change. In addition to this, we have other drivers of internal displacement in the context of climate change that are not directly linked with disasters. And I'm thinking in particular of the disappearance of land. So if you think of people living on small island states, for instance, and sea level rise, that's a rather famous example of why people absolutely have to leave as their land is becoming flooded by sea level rising and have to move somewhere else. We also have examples of people forced to move from their homes because they lose their usual source of income, their livelihoods. And that can be because they are farmers and there is a reduction in crop productivity, or maybe because they live off tourism and there is a decrease in tourism because coral reefs are dying as a result of ocean acidification. So you see, it's not so straightforward. There are actually lots of steps in the process of displacement in the context of climate change. And then the last trigger of displacement I'll mention, and I'm sure we'll touch upon this in our conversations today, is loss of access to drinking water and food. So I'm sure you already know, and you can see from what I'm saying already, that some groups of people are particularly at risk of being affected by this type of displacement. And I already mentioned people living off tourism, people living on small island states. We're of course thinking also of some groups of people who are particularly dependent on their environment. And I'm thinking of some rural communities, farmers, agro-pastoralists, indigenous communities in some countries, and so on and so forth. What we've also seen in our research is that particular groups of people, when they are displaced, are facing greater security risks. And here I'm thinking people with disabilities, in many contexts, women and girls, in many contexts as well, children or older people. They are all affected by internal displacement in ways that can be very disproportionate because of their identities. So all of this information is very important to keep in mind. And the way we've tried to do this over the past few years at IDMC, the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, is to go beyond our initial mandate of counting people. We used to be counting IDPs. How many internally displaced people are there in one country? That was as far as we could go for many, many years. And then over the past 5 years, really, we started digging deeper and trying to understand gender inequalities. How many women do we have in the group? How many men? What are their ages? Do they live with any disabilities? What is their socioeconomic background? What is their income and their educational level? And all of this information is really helping us highlight groups of people who are particularly at risk of being affected by displacement in the first place, and then being less able to cope with that displacement in the context of climate change. So we're doing this by collecting data that is disaggregated by various characteristics. We're also doing this by conducting research and key informant interviews with people who represent particular groups of people. We always make sure we're interviewing representatives of youth groups and women representatives and representatives of people with disabilities in the communities where we do research. So it's a first step, but I must say it's still very preliminary. So I'm really looking forward to learning from everyone's experience here on the call today, and then coming back to my own work with what I'll be hearing from you. With this, I'll take just 1 second to see what you've all written in the chat, and that's really good. We have people from all over the world, really. A few of you are in Europe. That's great. So Philippines, excellent. Uppsala, lovely. Nepal, of course. Nepal is where our first speaker is currently located. So maybe I can invite you to come in already, Bijay. Are you able to unmute and join us?
Sure. Thank you, Crystal.
Thank you, Bijay.
Thank you very much. And it's very interesting with examples you give the concept of intersectionality. And I'm from Nepal, working in International Alert. International Alert is UK-based peace building organizations. And years also, we have been working from like long time. So I will start with giving a broad overview of the Nepal. Nepal is have a like 30 million populations, but its range of peoples where living is, our lower elevation is 59 meter, but our highest elevations is 8,848 meters. So that's the Mount Everest. So within that, the peoples live within only 200 kilometers. You can get that kind of the elevation. So you can understand how diverse peoples are. We have like 23 ethnic group who spoke like 123 mother tongues. And out of them, like 59 were actually indigenous communities. So even though like majority of the populations are Hindus, even within the Hindu, there is the multiple caste lines, different caste lines. So you can understand how diverse it is. So and it's also entrenched by poverty, inequality, and marginalizations. So I think Nepal is a kind of perfect package to talk about how to integrate intersectionality. And because it is also the post-conflict country, we had a like Maoist movement from 1995 to 2006. So where around like 30,000 people's life, 30,000, it took like 30,000 people's lives, and around like 200,000 people displaced. Even though when you heard about the Nepal, that's Maoist movement, you heard about the Maoist movement, but it's actually the coalitions of the several discontent communities, identities movement. At the end of the day, at the end of that movement, they just join it, because Maoist movement started as a class war, but when it's end, it's actually the movement of different identity and ethnicity. So you can understand from that the why actually intersectionality matters. From this, we can understand it. And because of the current climate change, like it's going to increase intensity, magnitude, and frequency of the whole weather patterns, and then that's going to have a diverse consequences to the different marginalized groups, different identities, different cultural groups, completely differently. So that's why I think we have to integrate we need to integrate the climate change, because climate change not like, because of the current climate change, this marginalizations and the different discontent within a different identity not go away. It will still these problems are still continue, and over it actually climate change like create more havoc on it. So therefore I think not only like when we like conventional climate adaptations and conventional development approach is not going to address this only if we look from the if you look from the conventional development approach. So we need to have a more kind of climate smart kind of peace building approach to it. And for that, I think we identify basically three bottlenecks. When we had done a research, and also when we actually implement in the our interventions, our projects, we identify three basic kind of bottlenecks. What's actually in current conventional approach. One is that a lot of time when we design the projects, we try to make it more legible, more understandable. Like we come up with a gender equality and then social inclusion broader framework. But when we actually try to make it more legible, we a lot of time erase the intersectionality. And that is one of the kind of constraints with the conventional development approach. The second one is lot of time actually when we design interventions, we try to find the policy solutions. So when we actually, but like because like country like Nepal, well, there is the huge power asymmetry. Lot of time policy actually fails because a lot of time the things happens in very informal power relations because of the informal settings. And therefore I think to start with the policy solutions is not kind of solve the kind of biggest problems. The third one is that we forget to take account the keepers of the environment, the communities who actually experiences every day the climate change, also come up with the lot of resilient and adaptive techniques. So until unless we don't actually recognize them, and then we understand them, listen them, learning from them, our projects cannot going to be successful. So based on that experiences, we identify like 3 basics rules for the kind of climate smart peace building approaches. One is we need to design a platform approach rather than like top down approach, more platform approach, where marginalized community from the different identity work with the elected leaders or peoples who are like duty bearers to come up with the solutions. But like what happened is that we've done that, and then what we actually find is that when you're actually doing it, it's after some time it's hit the kind of wall, because the peoples who are in power, they don't want to like kind of give all the powers to those marginalized community from the different sections of the society. So that's why we feel that we need to, like, second rule is that we need to build the leadership, cultivate the leaderships from the different marginalized community, so they can advocate, they can like come up with the solutions, they can lead. And also because when this kind of the new problems comes, it's also need a new knowledge system. Like Nepal has a history of like community forestry management, and the community forestry management create an opportunity from the different section of community to come to get that social space which wasn't like before, because it's the new space. So similarly, we need to empower climate change adaptation strategy with different intersectional communities, and that helps actually them to like kind of be a leaders by themselves and then solve to themselves. Third one is how much we focus on different technologies and different kind of tools to provide them climate change kind of adaptive. We should not kind of go beyond focusing on what actually the root cause of the problems. Like in Nepal, it's actually the landowner. If we don't address the land ownership, how much you invest in agriculture, it's only increase the cost of the production, which is more difficult for the peoples who have the less land, because the peoples who have the more land, they can commercialize their agricultures and they get profits. Who have the less land, they could not invest in it. So I think these are the 3 basics rules we need to follow when we design the climate smart peace building approaches. And finally, what I want to say is that like every interventions for to address the climate adaptations, it should be start from learning and it should end from the learn, because the problems we are facing is new. It's actually intensify the already existing problems, and a lot of the solutions are within those communities. They can provide us a solution because they are living the everyday life, they're experiencing it, try to come up kind of new techniques and strategy to facing that problem. So for now, I want to just end with this, and then with further discussion, I will come up with the more kind of stories.
Thank you very much, Bijay. That's extremely insightful already. I'm just thinking, hearing your last point, that we've been mostly talking about using intersectional approaches to better understand problems and assess the needs. I hear from your last point, Bijay, that you're actually saying we could be using intersectional approaches to also identify solutions, which I find really, really enlightening already from the start of this conversation. Bijay, if I may, I already have a question. I'm going to use my prerogative as moderator to ask the first question.
Yeah.
Are you still, yes? Okay, excellent. I'm just really curious, and feel free to say no, but I'm wondering if, in your experience in Nepal, working with the communities that are most affected by climate change on these different issues, have you identified 1 or 2 or a couple of communities that you think are especially in need of being made more visible via intersectional approaches? So are there some communities that you think would really benefit from better support, but yet are remaining invisible in the data and in the analysis and in the support that's being planned?
I think one of the like in Nepal, because it's the we have a mountains, mid hills, and then Tarai. And in the Tarai region, one of the major problem actually is the flood. So a lot of the peoples who are living in area of the rivers were actually peoples who are already marginalized because of the caste systems. They don't have the land ownership. So these are the peoples who are displaced. And one of the identify is that these are the people who could not afford to migrate. You know, the peoples who are already like well off, they could migrate to the new place, but they could not migrate. And they started living in the places which is kind of use a lot of time forces, and also the community also because of that also.
Vijay, I think we've lost you temporarily. Is it just me or? While Vijay is joining us again, I actually wanted to ask our participants to quickly answer a second question in the chat.
Yeah.
And let us know, while we're reconnecting with Vijay, let us know in the chat whether you are using an intersectional approach in your work. And please respond by yes, no, or I don't know, I'm not sure. While you respond to my last question, everyone, on whether you are using an intersectional approach in your work, we ask our second speaker, Thomas Pitot, to join us. And then we'll get Vijay back on the line for the conversation, hopefully. Thomas, are you able to join us? I know you're also having connection issues from Dakar.
Yes, thank you. I have connection issue, but it's actually linked to the power cut.
Okay. Okay,
so
we hope you can stay with us.
Yeah, if I froze completely, that means I have a power cut, and then I will come back in a few minutes.
We will be patient. That's no problem at all. Right.
Good.
Well, Thomas, maybe I can just say a couple of words about who you are. And you're working currently with UNDP in the sub-regional hub for West African and Central Africa. Is that correct?
Yes.
Great. And I know you have over 15 years of experience working in international development, but what's especially interesting to us today is that you're currently providing advice and technical support to UNDP country offices throughout the region, but also regional economic communities of the African Union on topics such as resilience building, disaster preparedness, risk reduction, and on the relationship between climate risks, natural resources, and conflicts.
Exactly.
With that in mind, I was wondering if you could share your own experience within UNDP, and if you have any insights on the broader UN system. I think that would complement very nicely the more country-focused experience Vijay just shared with us from Nepal, on how multilateral organizations such as yours are using intersectional approaches in your region.
Yes, thank you. Maybe just to start, what I want to say is that the Sahel region is facing a very complex situation with a multidimensional crisis. This is a crisis that combines a weak governance, a high level of poverty and inequalities, demographic growth that is growing very fast, and also the climate that is becoming more and more unpredictable, and with also more and more extreme climate events. We are also in a region, you were talking earlier about the mobility of the people. Climate has always influenced the mobility of the people. And so in this region particularly, we have big pastoralist communities that have been following the vegetation and the climate, the seasonal climate, to get their cattle grow, and so we've always had also a situation where we had community of pastoralists living together with communities of farmers and sedentarian people. So there is also this question in the climate situation and the climate change that we are facing today, and also the demographic growth that we are facing, is that this is very much affecting the structure of the societies, of the traditional societies. And so this is very much at the heart of the issue. And what we see with the climate and conflict or security issues is that it very often collides around the issue of access to natural resources, especially land and water. And so this is why when we think about climate adaptation, disaster risk reduction, and conflict, we need to very much have that articulated, taking into consideration that the geophysical environment is very much linked to the social and cultural environment. And so now how do we integrate intersectionality into an intersectional perspective into our program? So first to say that it's still something new for us. We are also learning by doing. But when we act and when we develop programs and action on the ground, one of the first things that is needed for us is to understand the situation. So when we work on climate risks, we'll run risk analyses that include, of course, the hazard, the exposure, but also the vulnerability analysis. And so for us, this is where there is an entry point in this vulnerability analysis. We will collect data and integrate the intersectionalities by collecting disaggregated data by gender, by age, by ethnicity or castes or disability, or level of education. And what we will see very often is that those people that are the most vulnerable will be the one that, for example, women with low education, coming from minority ethnic groups. And so these are the type of population that we'll try to target first in our program. So because, you know, in the UN, we have also a strategy or a policy that is the left no one behind. And so we need to act on the most vulnerable. So the most vulnerable is very much an entry point when it comes to climate security and addressing the climate security risk nexus. Now, how do we act? So it's very important to understand the issue and to contextualize, because the situation can vary from one environment to another, and the Sahel region is a big region, so we have different type of situation. We have also a different type of crisis. We have a situation where we are in open conflict. We are in situation where there is more humanitarian crisis, and situations where it's more regular development situation. And then it's also a very fluid situation. So it can evolve very quickly from one situation to another. So this also, I think, influence also the complexity and how we must be at the same time proactive and reactive according to the situation that we are facing. So once we have run this analysis and we understand the vulnerability and the different factors of vulnerability and multiplicity of those factors. We are trying as much as possible to integrate those most vulnerable population in the design of the activities. You know, we talk a lot about co-creation. So this is one of the, I would say, one of the tools that we have is to, you know, through focus group or the way we work with also our local partners, how do we make sure that the voices of those most vulnerable people are well understood and well taken into consideration in the activities, activities that will target them, but also activities that they will have ownership on. And so somehow, you know, we'll try to have them take a leadership on the activities and also in the structure in which we are trying to intervene, because it's one thing to intervene and to integrate those people in the activities that we are doing and targeting them, but also there's a structural and cultural system that is in place. And so we are trying to integrate as much as possible the voice of these people in the coordination mechanism. So for example, if we talk about the land ownership, which is also a big issue, you know that in the Sahel, a big proportion of agricultural workers are women, and yet women have very little access to land. And so also when we talk about, for example, natural resource management committees that we are trying to develop, bringing together the official authorities, the traditional authorities, and the communities. This is where also we have an entry point to bring the women, the youth, the minorities within those concertation mechanisms. So that they are also they are taken into consideration, and also as BJ was saying earlier, they are part of the solution. So this is very important, because what we see also is that, for example, in the region, the people that join the armed groups are very often the young teenagers, boys, that are coming from communities of pastoralists, for example, that are where the policies, the previous policies have not very well integrated pastoralism into the development of the countries, and so there isn't many options for them in terms of livelihoods, and given also the situation of very the demographic growth and the pressure that is on land and the climate dimension also. So how do we provide economic opportunities to this type of population, the undereducated minorities and the people that are susceptible to join the armed forces, is something that we are trying to integrate into the action that we are developing, no? But so that is basically how we do at the community level. And then we work also very much at the upper level, at the national and regional level. So it's also the question of how do we integrate those questions and the lessons learned that we can get from these activities on the ground into policy and strategy development. How do we integrate those considerations into national development plans? How also do we integrate that into the aid coordination mechanism. And so we have, that brings the question also of monitoring that. And how do we have indicators that we can develop to monitor and to make sure that we have the tools to see the evolution of the situation and make sure that what we are doing is right. And you know, also sometimes we think that because we include this population, the most vulnerable into we are targeting them, etc. But maybe that can be another way of excluding them by the local, you know, and the traditional communities. So, you know, there is also the monitoring aspects and how we take that into consideration at the policy and the broader level is very important. This link is very important for us. Now, also what I wanted to say is that, so I was talking about UNDP, but what we do at UNDP, but, and especially UNDP in the field of climate resilience and disaster risk reduction and climate security, climate adaptation. But the UN is also a broader family. So we have specialized organizations, and so we have to work better together on these issues. We recognize that we cannot address this situation by ourselves, and so the collaboration is very important. So for us also a key aspect is how we collaborate, how we coordinate, how we learn from each other, how we have a space where we can exchange and we can share lessons learned and, you know, what we do well or also what we do not well. And basically how we can learn from that is very important. So I don't know, I don't want to take too much time. Maybe I will end here, and yeah, we can continue the discussion.
Thank you, Thomas. No. Can you hear me now?
Now we can, yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Thomas. Sorry, this is a little bit hectic, but we're getting through a super interesting presentation already, Thomas. Thank you so much. I took note of many points you listed. I have a couple of questions in mind already, but I want to first pause and invite our participants to type questions into the chat as we go. So I see Bijay has joined us again. I hope we can communicate now. And thank you very much to your colleague who took over in the chat and contributed to your answer anyways in your absence. So please, everyone, do feel free to type any question you have now, and we can address them as we go or at the end. We do have a lot of time for discussion, so this is really what we're here for. And maybe as you think of your questions, I do have one that's really burning in my mind for maybe both Bijay and Thomas. And it's just a question, maybe as a fellow practitioner / researcher, I'm curious to know if in the past few years where you have been using intersectional approaches in your work, have you come across any particularly surprising finding using that type of approaches? So anything that you were really not expecting, or that maybe you suspected but you couldn't confirm before, and that you were able to do with intersectional approaches to your work, or maybe, if not surprising, at least a finding or a discovery that you found was especially useful and that you will remember as sort of one of the reasons why we should be using intersectional approaches in our work. So if you don't have an answer to that, that's okay too. I'm just really curious to know if Bijay, I see you've removed your video, but I hope you can still hear and talk to us. And otherwise, Thomas, if you have an answer to that initial question, please feel free to jump in. Or Bijay.
Should I go first or?
Yes, please. While we can hear you, go. We can hear you.
Okay. Actually, what we after the flood happened, government start to distribute the kind of relief, and then when they are relief, they started with the most marginalized that we call the Dalit, which in caste system they are the lower one. When they started, what they found out is that they face a two problem where during the relief distribution, a lot of the peoples who are actually from the higher caste, who are more privileged, they actually registered themselves as the marginalized groups, and then they get the relief. That's the one happened. Another is most of the marginalized communities who actually are doing agriculture, they don't own land. So actually the relief actually goes to the peoples who actually own the land, but not face the consequences of the climate change, like climatic event, so that is one of the and that's actually increased the discontent. And that's the one finding. Another is we also what we find is most of the time the resiliency actually come up within the communities, especially from surprisingly from the market, natural resources that are available and within the communities, not from the and development partners, governments, or actually the others. So that's the two of the thing, and that's from this what we are learning is that we need to kind of change our strategy. We're helping more we need to empower more people who are already available on the ground rather than having rather than go with the kind of new institution, new organization. So that's our kind of reflection.
Thank you, Bijay. That actually leads very nicely to a question we got from Richard Jordan in the chat already. And Toma, I'll get back to you in a second if you also have an answer to my question, but it's just such a nice link to that question. And Richard is asking us, have you utilized trained storytellers to help bridge the gaps between marginalized groups and government entities? And maybe you can also reflect more broadly on how smooth or not smooth that process has been of bridging this gap.
So if I'm correct, you're asking about like a storytelling exercise?
Yeah. So have you utilized trained storytellers to help bridge the gaps between marginalized groups and government entities?
We did not actually kind of bridge the gap between government and then marginalized group, but because we just came from the conflict, and then the storytelling exercises is done in actually the peoples who actually face the kind of conflict, basically the conflict victim. So what we actually try to do, use the same actually the trained persons to understand the marginalizations through the storytelling exercises. So that's what we try to do. Ravina ji, my colleague and our country actor just mentioned that we try to utilize the kind of storytelling workshops within the marginalized community, and we ask them to reach out the peoples who actually never have experienced this development kind of cultures. Like in Nepal, we have a lot of development agencies. They are doing a lot of workshops. They come up with create one different kind of the culture. So storytelling exercise help us to understand the marginalization from the marginalization which is not in who are not every day in our contact, who are not every day our beneficiaries. So that was very helpful. But that just Richard suggestions is also would be a very interesting actually to not only to actually understand the whole the marginalization process, but also bridge the gap between the government and the marginalized community. I will take that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Bijay. That reminds me of the second rule you mentioned earlier in your presentation, where you were saying how important it is to cultivate leadership for marginalized groups, so that we try to bridge a little bit those unhelpful power dynamics that we all face in our work. But maybe we can get back to that in a second, because I see that our third speaker, Selma, has joined us. Hello, Selma. Are you able to unmute and say a few words?
Yes, perfect. Hi, thank you so much for the invitation. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, we can hear you. We can see you.
Right,
Great.
awesome, perfect.
I know you're having some connection issues, as pretty much all of us are. So while we have you on the line, I'll just hand the floor straight to you, and we hope you can stay. But you're actually here as a social and climate youth activist. So you're really bringing into this discussion a very particular perspective, which is that of young people. And I'd love to just open the floor to you and let you tell us why you think it's so important to use intersectional approaches when it comes to maybe capturing the needs, but also most importantly, offering the place for participation for young people in solutions.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for the invitation. It really means a lot. I'm trying to find a quiet place in my university, so I hope it's quiet enough so that you can hear me.
It's perfect.
All right, so again, yes, okay, awesome, glad to hear that. So basically, as you stated, I'm a social and climate youth activist, which means like to me, taking more actions and having being in relation with the government, with the NGOs, with the private sectors, it's something so hard to go for because it's something that we're struggling all time with, and we're trying to fill this gap and explain to the other people who are interested to become activists and to become in this field as advocates and the change maker and change makers of their communities. So it's really quite hard to sometimes really explain to them that you have to be patient. I know sometimes it really takes a lot of time, and we are struggling a lot when it comes to being connected to them, trying to always highlight the same recommendations, the same proposals, making sure that we just want to see the change that fits all of us, the change that prioritizes, of course, humans over economies and businesses and everything. So to be honest with you, me personally, I remember when we had less.
Selma, we've lost you, unfortunately. I hope you can come back. Okay, while we have a second of pause, I'll again invite everyone in the chat to either let us know if and how you are applying intersectional approaches in your work, because we're all contributing to this conversation today, really. So we'd love to open the floor to those of you in the audience, don't like that word of audience, and the participants list. Or if you have any questions, feel free to share them. I see we have another comment in the chat from, I'm sure I will pronounce this wrong, but I want to say Josel, just because I'm French and it sounds like the right way to pronounce your name, Josel. I hope this is not too offensive to you in the way I pronounced it, but would you like to come in actually and ask your question or your comment? Do feel free. Are you able to unmute? I don't know if you're able to unmute as a participant. Let's see. You
Good
are
afternoon,
unmuted.
everyone.
Thank you,
Hello.
Giselle.
So I have actually written a question in the chat box, and this refers to our recent results of our national elections, wherein we will be governed again by another member of the Marcos family. So the recent result of our national election has further polarized the differences between those who believe in the liberal democratic ideals and those who took advantage of the failings of our democratic institutions. Unfortunately, many of our disadvantaged sectors were deluded by this opportunist and being taken advantage actually by the incumbent governments. So my question actually is, how can we use intersectional approach in bringing those deluded by fake news back to reality, and together work hand in hand in realizing our shared dream of an inclusive development.
Thank you, Giselle. For those of you who didn't see your earlier inputs into the chat, you are joining us from the Philippines, obviously. So that's a really good question, which I think can lead to maybe a short round of contributions from two speakers, perhaps three, if Selma can join us again, on actually the challenges. I think this links to the challenges really of making everything we've been talking about over the past few days and weeks around intersectionality, making this actually count in policies and programs, because it's not, I think all of us on this call today anyways are absolutely convinced we need to do this. It's really important. This is the only way to go forward for leaving no one behind, being inclusive. But we are dealing with, in our different fields of work, other practitioners, governments, policymakers, organizations that may have different perspectives in mind or priorities in mind, and they're not always listening. And Giselle, you're also mentioning the issue of fake news and receiving information that is actually harmful from various sources. So that's a great question that I don't have an answer to be honest. We're still struggling very much at the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center to even just get the word across around the fact that internal displacement is a big issue, and that not every displaced person crosses a border and goes to leave to a high-income country. Most of them actually stay in their country, and they're receiving even less assistance. And within that group, highlighting those most vulnerable is very difficult. I personally have found it useful in my line of work to be able to refer to figures and to what we consider to be facts, such as, you know, estimates of the number of women or children or people with disabilities, testimonies from these people, to really put a human face and a voice on the issues we're usually discussing with data. I think it's helpful, but I'm not sure we're reaching everyone we should be reaching with that. So I wonder if maybe Thomas, you'd have something to say about this, or about any other challenge you've been facing in your work.
Yeah, I don't know if specifically I can answer this question specifically. Difficult because question. in the Sahel also the situation is that you know, for over the years there's been very weak governments, and so it's not even that people don't trust their government, is that some people don't even, they've never had interaction with the government. They don't know the idea, the concept of government does not exist. So, you know, I can live in Niger, cross to Mali, go to Algeria, go to then Nigeria, and then, you know, all of a sudden I will be told that I am Malian, for example. And very often also in those contexts, we see that the first interaction that these people that have never seen the government, never seen any basic services from the government, etc., the first thing that they see is the military. So then the representation that they have from their government is the person of the soldier, which is not necessarily the best you know, person to represent, you know, the good aspects of what a government should do for you. And so that is a big issue. And how do we ensure and rebuild or build the trust between the people and the government is very important, because of course, you know, we say that every time in the Sahel that a school that is closed by the government, every time there's a school closed by the government, there's a school that is open by the religious groups. And so that is an issue, because then there is a message also that is brought to the young generation, and that changes the culture and the perspective of the young generation on development and you know, the social and cultural systems, which you know, normally in the Sahel, in Africa, the religion was quite you know, more progressist, and now we have a much more rigorist dimension of religious belief. So it's not an easy question. I think that for us, very much working and trying to bring the government in terms of provider of basic social services is very important. And so this is where we should try to work, and we work as a UN together with organizations like UNICEF, the World Food Programme, etc., and humanitarian organizations, so that the humanitarian support that is provided and that is normally very much limited in time can be then structurally owned and appropriate by the government, and then the access to those social and basic services are continued. So I don't know if I answered your question, but it's not. I don't think that in the Sahel the question of fake news has always been here. It's not something new. We've seen also with the COVID, for example, a lot of fake news that were coming in. The rate of vaccination in the Sahel is very low. And this is also aligned with the mistrust that the people have with the government, etc. So I don't know if I answered your question, but
thanks for trying, Thomas. It's a really difficult question that if anyone has an answer to, do feel free to jump in. But maybe I can just ask you to add briefly, because I see Selma is also back on the line. So while she's here, I want to give her the floor again. But Thomas, if you could just add a little bit to what you were saying earlier in your presentation around your question really of how to integrate what we're learning through intersectional approaches into national development plans and aid coordination mechanisms and so on. And there maybe it's another tricky question. I don't know if you have any successful example of doing so that you could share with us now. Or not?
Yes, of course. Again, I apologize. Yes.
Oh, hello.
You can hear me, right?
Selma, we can hear you. Can you hear us?
Is it good?
Can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
I can hear you,
Can you hear me now?
I think there might be a delay.
Yes, perfectly. Okay, awesome. Okay, awesome. So basically, yeah, there's a delay for sure. So basically, just adding to what I was saying, well, before asking, in fact, like before opening the floor to you to talk about or to be the advocators of such global challenges, we need to ask ourselves why we started even asking, like why we started doing this at first place. Now, like the answer automatically would be because there wasn't a negative impact on us, and that's actually made us want to I would say not only climate change, to be honest, but even like the other global challenges, but climate change does at first place because it's impacting the entire all sectors of life. Now we need to ask ourselves why we started doing this. Was it really enough what the governments did? Was it really enough what the private sectors and the NGOs did? So now most of us started even taking individual actions so that we can reach more people with our advocacy. It became so hard to just get people in because we talk about having more support from governments, from NGOs, as I said, from private sectors and stakeholders. But like when you try to explain this to other people who might be interested in starting this advocacy, it's like always hard to bring it in because they are still not seeing enough happening in the world, and that's of course not to mention the upcoming generations, because we are working so hard to lay this picture for them so that they will be interested, and we will not have so much blame on us when we become future leaders one day. So it's quite interesting to really get the support of the governments and the NGOs. To be honest, me personally, I have been listened by the UN and like the UN, I would say staff members more than my governments. Every single time I was invited to one of the maybe gatherings of where some ministers were there, every single time I was used to just fill in the chair. I was always used for the back seat. However, when I am invited by UN and when I trusted enough, I always I get the floor to talk and to talk about my recommendations, to complain and to oppose whatever is happening, which is something that I'm not seeing in my country and so many other youth as well, especially when we talk about the MENA region. So I would say we need to give the floor to youth so that they can express more, take their actions easily. Why having so much policies in funding a certain NGO like what is happening in my country? I got funding from a European embassy that is not only here in my country. So you can see that governments are limiting our actions, are delaying our projects and ideas as well, which is something that we don't want it to see it happening again, because we need more contributions from youth so that we can not end it and this challenge because it's too late to end it, but at least limit it, because we will be the ones leading the future and we will be the ones getting the blame and not the now who are holding the entire thing. It will be us. So it's quite important to leave the floor to youth so that they can talk about their insecurities, how they are being so impacted by our actions that have never been so studied. We keep always insisting on having amazing businesses and economies, and we forgot about the other part, that humans are being affected with this. We turned so many humans into refugees. So many children are impacted. As youth, we are still getting so much on our shoulders. So it's high time to just open the floor for contributions. And as I always say, and I keep always saying, trusting us does worth it. We're bringing amazing ideas to the floor. We're having proposals that have never been brought before in any gatherings by any minister or any stakeholder. So yes, we just need this floor, and this is through opening it to youth activists like not me, but like everyone who is just trying to advocate for such global challenges, because it's not only talking and opening the floor for us and having discussions, but we are taking actions on the ground and we know what is exactly.
Selma, can you unmute?
Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, super. Look, I think we heard you loud and clear, and thank you for this very inspiring chat that we just had already. I do have one quick question though, building on what you just said. Are you seeing any improvement? Are you feeling that maybe over the past year or a couple of years you and young people in general are getting more access to the floor and more opportunities to participate in discussions or solutions, or not?
To be honest, I can see that there is some progress, because in every single gathering we do have, ministers do love the fact that they are listening to us. But what comes after is what we're looking for more. Of course, we appreciate their time for listening and for just bringing us into the floor and for trusting us to do this, because it's something that we are not even seeing in our communities and countries. But what we're looking for is implementing what we're saying, which is something that we're not seeing, and we're not seeing it so progressing, unfortunately. Listening to us, giving us the floor, having these discussions, admitting that we're having amazing recommendations. I will admit it now that it did all happen. But what comes after, as I said, implementing our thoughts and implementing our projects and getting us involved in decision making, which is something that we're still looking for to be involved in, because we got this and we can do it, and it's going to be perfectly done if we have been trusted again to do it. This is exactly what is not so seen on the ground. In fact, you know, the sad thing is that we are seeing promises that this will be seen on the ground, but it's still not happening. And that's actually what is disappointing us the most, is that we're seeing promises, and this promises still not turned into actions, unfortunately.
Thank you, Selma. Actually, what you're saying here resonates, I think, with what both Bijay and Thomas were saying earlier about then making sure that these voices we're finally beginning to capture are being heard and that something is being done about it. And I think it would make for a fourth discussion around intersectional approaches, actually. So, you know, we know what it is. We know we need more data. Now, hopefully, some of us here on the call know how to go about implementing it in our work. But what is still really missing is how to convince others use our findings and to use the recommendations and the findings of intersectional approaches to research and assessments in national development plans and aid and support and response plans and so on. That was my question to Thomas just before you joined us again, Selma. So Thomas, we are reaching the end of this conversation already, but if you have a good example, a successful example of integrating intersectional approaches into this type of work of strategies, please do share it briefly before we hand the floor back to Sigrid for final remarks.
Yes, thank you. No, I don't know if we can say that it's a success story, but what I can say is that we with the data and the information that we collect and the consideration that we put on intersectionality, we can then integrate that into, for example, in the development of early warning systems. So we work with the national meteorological agencies, the civil protection agencies, the regional also agencies like AgriMed, SILS, etc., that are involved into climate monitoring, warning, and then communicating and action. And so by having this information on the most vulnerable will help us then to target better on the messaging and on the preparedness of an imminent disaster, upcoming disaster. So that's maybe one of the examples that comes out of my mind right now. That is something that is very concrete and that we can do in terms of messaging, in terms of preparedness, to include that also into the contingency planning. And also something that I wanted to say is that you know, these people, they don't wait for us to come with solutions. So there are solutions and, you know, resilience options that they are put in place by this community, whether we want it or not. And so then the question is how we integrate that, and that informs our own program and not the other way around. So it's very, to me, that's where I found it very also interesting, is that we have a lot of things to learn from them, and so we can then from the learning exercise integrate that into policies and actions such as also contingency planning, early warning systems, etc. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. And I see we also have some contributions in the chat from Ramsey and Richard. Maybe some others. I apologize. I couldn't keep track with everything that you were writing, but we are reaching the end of our webinar. Unfortunately, we only have 2 minutes left, so I'm already a little bit late, handing the floor back to Sigrid or Jose. I'm not sure who wants to take the floor now for final remarks.
I'm going to share final remarks, but I feel remiss. I maybe give Ramsey 30 seconds to come in, since he's patiently been waiting and has also added in the chat. So if you want to just quickly come in, Ramsey, to share a reflection before we close, you're welcome to do so.
Sigrid, it's extremely kind of you. I hope you can hear me okay, first of all. Picking up the point which I really welcome and encourage, made by Thomas, of predictability, early warning, anticipation. Indeed, it is difficult when it comes to climate-related issues, but if we reverse the direction of consideration, it is predictable that sanctions imposed on a country where there is conflict is going to make it difficult, for example, to pay for importing spare parts for agricultural machinery, or to be paid for exporting agricultural produce. And yet this is the main part that feeds the population. So what about the predictability of indeed severe humanitarian needs, I beg your pardon, resulting from the application of sanctions, and actually trying to be ready for the new humanitarian needs that are going to result from the sanctions, or modify the sanctions so they don't result in these humanitarian needs?
Thank you, Ramsey. And that would be the topic for a whole nother seminar, a really important point though, so thanks for raising it. And really, we're out of time, but I just want to say this has been a really rich discussion. And I'm really glad to hear that many of you already are using intersectional approaches. You indicated in the chat, however, that you recognize that more needs to be done, improvements can be made, and we're hoping that this conversation contributed to that. We heard that I really like the point made earlier that that the intersectional sort of approaches and data collection is not just about identifying needs, but it's also about involving those most vulnerable communities in identifying solutions and in giving them voice in identifying their priorities, but also that it offers an opportunity to promote dialogue, a national dialogue among communities to identify the layers of vulnerability and what are driving those that are climate related and otherwise. And as Thomas pointed out, an opportunity to build that trust. I also really liked Bijay's point about the importance of using intersectional approaches, that we start with learning and we end with learning, that it's really this cycle and we need to continuously monitor and ensure that whatever approaches that are designed are not inadvertently exacerbating vulnerability or marginalization. And we hope therefore that this contribution offers that sort of an opportunity to continue this exchange among those who are really believers in this, who can continue to advocate for this. And as was mentioned by my colleague Jose at the beginning, but also Johanna in the chat, we are at the Dag Hammarskjöld Foundation producing this volume towards the end of this year with a number of different contributions, trying to facilitate that exchange of knowledge, ideas, application of tools in advancing intersectional approaches. So please stay tuned for that. And it will also highlight, which came out in this discussion here, the importance of leadership that is given to marginalized communities, but also really at all levels. I think Thomas pointed out the importance of all different UN entities from the country level, working all the way to the global level, but also governments. And as Selma pointed out, also youth leadership in advancing these discussions at all levels. And then one thing that came up also, which would also be the topic for a whole another discussion, is the importance of resources. We know that applying intersectional tools, they are resource intensive. And so we also appeal to donors to take that into account in their decision making. So really with that, and being a couple minutes over the time, I really want to thank our speakers, Bijay, Thomas, Selma, for your time and your contributions, your thoughtful sharing of your experiences and perspectives, but also Christelle for very competent moderating of this discussion, and to all of you for taking the time to join us. And we hope that we can stay in touch and encourage that you reach out to us if you're interested in being more involved in this work. So thank you to all and have a great day.